Cahuzi Biega National Park, early morning. The ground was soft with recent rain, the air thick with moisture and the smell of green. Through low shrubs and tangled vines, Ranger Elias moved quietly, his boots pressing into the damp soil. He wasn't following tracks, just a feeling. Something was wrong. The birds were quiet. No distant hoots, no rustling in the canopy. A few steps ahead, near the base of a strangler fig, the stillness came into view. Two gorillas. One lay sprawled on her side, unmoving. The other sat upright beside her, legs folded, back curved slightly forward, arms resting on her knees. She didn't look up when Elias stopped. She didn't look at anything at all. He raised a hand slowly to signal the rest of the small field team to halt. No one made a sound. The sitting gorilla's chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. She was young, maybe 10 years, a juvenile still. Her eyes were half-lidded, not with sleep but something deeper, resignation, worry. Elias had seen that look before, in the hours after a silverback was lost to a poacher's snare. But there were no snares here. The body on the ground belonged to a younger female, smaller, with limbs awkwardly bent. No visible wound, no blood, just the silence of something very wrong. Flies hovered nearby, but she didn't react. Not a flinch. Elias took a quiet breath. "Stay with her," he whispered to the vet behind him, a woman named Dr. Mako. "Just observe. We don't move yet." The vet nodded, crouching in the shade of a twisted trunk, binoculars lifted, scanning the form on the ground, the rise of the rib cage, if there was any. A minute passed, then another, and then 5. The sitting gorilla never shifted. She blinked only once. A soft, pulsing hum came from her chest, barely audible. Not alarmed, not a threat, just presence. The team noted no signs of trauma. No thorns, no broken limbs, no obvious disease markings. But the younger female didn't move. If she was alive, she was near the edge, and the one who sat beside her seemed to know. "It's not mourning," Dr. Mako murmured. "It's waiting." That was the word. Waiting, like she couldn't leave yet, or wouldn't. Elias stepped lightly to one side, avoiding eye contact. The forest around them remained still, as if even the wind was holding its breath. A leaf fell from above and brushed the shoulder of the sitting gorilla. She didn't stir. Whatever had happened, the standing one had not left her side, through nightfall, perhaps even longer. There were tracks leading in, none leading out. No nest nearby, no other troop sounds within earshot. Elias jotted notes. Juvenile present, female prone. No aggression observed. He circled a phrase twice. No vocalization. A decision needed to be made. Step in or stay back. If they approached, would the sitting female resist? Would she run? Or worse, would it break whatever thread still held the downed one to this world? He lowered the notebook, eyes steady. "We hold," he said, "at least for now." They marked the perimeter. No threats nearby, no signs of others approaching. Just the thick breath of the forest and the weight of waiting. They would return soon, with sedation if needed. But for now, it was 2 lives. One barely holding on, and the other refusing to leave. If they moved too soon, the watching one might flee. If they waited too long, the one lying still might not make it. Either way, the cost was clear. She sat in the clearing like stone. The forest around her whispered with insects and the rustle of leaves, but the gorilla did not move. Her chest rose and fell slowly, almost imperceptibly, and her arms lay slack across her knees. Ranger Elias stayed a careful distance back, lowering his voice and signaling the others to remain still. The female had not touched a leaf, had not shifted her weight, and had not responded to the faint calls of her troop. It was the stillness of exhaustion or of something heavier. Elias kept his eyes fixed on her posture. There were no wounds, no blood, no marks of a fall. Her fur was intact, her limbs straight, yet something in the curve of her shoulders carried weight, a heaviness that spoke louder than injury. She had folded into herself, her back rounded, head low, gaze set on nothing. For a gorilla, silence of this depth was rarely casual. It was the silence of withdrawal. A faint breeze moved through the canopy, shaking a cluster of ripe figs nearby. Other gorillas shifted uneasily in the branches, watching her from above, but they did not descend. They offered no food, no approach. Even her juvenile, perched not far, did not dare cross the ground to her side. He watched with wide eyes, shifting his weight anxiously from one foot to the other, then giving a soft whimper. She did not look at him. Elias noted the signs. No defensive movements, no chewing, no grooming. She had retreated inward, unresponsive to the world that pulsed around her. For an animal whose survival depended on constant alertness, this absence of reaction was as alarming as any visible wound. He leaned closer to a colleague and murmured, "It isn't the body, it's the heart." The ground beneath her was marked by the press of her weight. It seemed she had been sitting there for hours. Insects moved across her arms without her brushing them away. Once, a vine brushed her back as it shifted in the wind, and she gave no shudder, no twitch. The forest moved, but she did not. The young one whined again, louder this time, then gave a short, sharp bark, as though urging her to rise. His small fists beat against a branch, sending leaves raining down near her. She blinked, slowly, but nothing more. Her eyes remained dull, clouded by something unseen. Grief hung in the space like mist, pressing into every quiet sound. Elias kept his body low, making no sudden gestures. Every instinct told him this was not a moment for force. Intervention risked panic and risked tearing the fragile thread of calm that kept her rooted in place. But the danger was clear. An unmoving gorilla in the wild was a gorilla at risk. If she would not feed, her strength would fade. If she would not rise, she could not follow the troop. Predators would notice. Even the forest floor itself could become a hazard, damp and crawling with illness. He let his breath ease out slowly, weighing options. The juvenile climbed higher, restless, glancing between his mother and the distant males. His agitation sharpened the urgency. The longer she stayed, the more strained the troop would become. Bonds could weaken. A young one could be left vulnerable. The balance of a group rested on the strength of each member, and now the weight of one female threatened to shift that balance. Still, Elias did not press forward. He had seen mourning before, the long vigils of elephants, the lingering at still bodies among primates. There were echoes of it now in the way she sat, unyielding, facing inward to something no human could fully read. He whispered again, barely a breath, "You're almost there," though he knew she might not hear or might not care. His words were less for her and more for the still air that pressed against them both. A bird called sharply from the upper canopy, startling the juvenile into stillness. For a brief moment his silence mirrored hers. And in that silence Elias marked the fragility of the moment. A mother unmoving, a child waiting, a troop unsettled. The risks grew with each passing hour, yet the forest gave no answer. Only the quiet weight of her bent form and the knowledge that something unseen had taken hold. Word count, 598. For a long while it seemed as if the forest itself had gone still. The rangers shifted in the undergrowth with care, whispering quietly about moving back, about leaving space for the troop to decide its course. Elias crouched lower, his eyes never leaving the unmoving figure stretched on the ground. The posture had told them enough. No movement, no sound, no flicker of response to the calls above. But then, as a shaft of filtered light crossed the body, he saw it. The faintest swell beneath the ribs, the subtle lift and fall of breath. It was fragile, almost lost against the dappled shadows, but it was there. He raised his hand quickly. signaling the others to hold. The quiet around them deepened. Even the young male, restless in the canopy, seemed to sense the shift. The body was not gone. Life remained, but just barely. The rise and fall came slow, irregular, and almost shallow enough to be missed if one blinked too long. A stir of air left her lips, not a sound, just the faint proof that her lungs still drew the forest in. The risk changed instantly. What had looked like the end became a narrow window where help mattered. Without intervention, that rhythm could falter and stop. With intervention, there was still a chance. Elias spoke low and steady. "She's breathing." It was all that needed saying, and every ranger knew what followed. One of them radioed the field vet, words brief but urgent. A life hung on how quickly careful hands could arrive. The team prepared the approach path, clearing a line without breaking the silence. Every move was measured, no fast steps, no raised tones. Yet, as the signal crackled faintly in the air, the watcher stirred. The older female who had sat in stillness now shifted her weight. She rose just enough to plant her palms firmly against the earth, her dark eyes cutting to the men who stood at the edge. It was the first reaction she had given since they arrived. Her body, tense and solid, pressed into the ground between them and the fragile shape that breathed in faint, uneven gasps. The air thickened. The rangers knew her stance. A block, not a bluff. She did not rush, did not bare teeth, but the message was clear. No step closer. Elias froze, his chest tight, because the risk was now doubled. To approach would bring resistance, perhaps violence. To retreat would leave the young one's breath unchecked. Either choice could end in loss. The downed gorilla gave a faint shiver, her chest rising in a shallow rhythm, then stalling as though each inhale cost more than she could spare. Elias measured the seconds, each one longer than the last. The vet was on the way, but the forest was wide, and minutes stretched thin when a life balanced on such fragile lungs. He lowered his gaze deliberately, keeping his body language calm. The female's nostrils flared, her shoulders squared. She gave a low, guttural sound. Not loud, but filled with warning. She had taken ownership of the space, of the weak form behind her. Her silence of grief had shifted into silence of guard. The weight she carried had a focus now. Protection. She would not yield the ground easily. The young male in the trees barked again, sharp and anxious. He swayed, half prepared to descend, half bound by the tension below. His confusion thickened the air, the pull between mother and offspring stretching thin and fragile. Elias noted how the female's ears twitched at his cry, but she never looked away from the humans. Her blockade was unwavering. Minutes dragged. The faint movement in the chest grew more irregular. The pauses longer. The risk sharpened. Delay could mean the end, but so could pressure. Elias steadied his breath, signaling the team to wait. He knew they could not force entry. A gorilla defending space would not stop until the threat was gone, and the fragile body on the ground could not endure chaos. The only path forward was patience, even as time ran thin. The crackle of the radio again. The vet was close now, approaching with gear in hand. Elias whispered almost inaudibly, "Hold steady." The words carried through the small group. No one moved. No one challenged the line the gorilla had drawn. The forest grew heavier, the tension rooted in the ground between breath and silence. Then, in the quiet, the downed female's chest rose again, faint but more deliberate, as though some hidden reserve surfaced for one more inhale. It was proof, but also a warning. She was alive, but slipping. Every second mattered, and still the watcher did not move. Her body remained firm, her arms anchoring her weight into the soil, her gaze fixed on the rangers. She was the barrier between human help and natural order, between urgency and patience. The balance held there, taut and fragile. Life just within reach, and yet kept out of reach. The forest watched with them, the slow rhythm of breath the only measure of time that mattered. The waiting stretched long beneath the canopy, each moment measured by the faint, uneven rhythm of a chest rising against the earth. The vet had arrived, kneeling low at the edge of the clearing, his pack laid gently beside him. No sudden reach, no rustle of haste. Every movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial, as though he were asking permission without words. The gorilla that barred the way held her ground. Her dark frame was solid, her arms pressed into the soil, her eyes unblinking. She did not lunge, did not roar. She simply existed as a wall between human hands and the fragile body behind her. The team understood what was at risk. To advance too soon could unravel everything. The sick female could not endure the chaos of a defense. But waiting carried its own danger. Her breaths came shallow, at times stalling altogether, the pause stretching until it seemed the forest itself held its lungs in sympathy. Each lapse deepened the urgency. They could not lose the thread of life by standing still, yet they could not reach it without the silent guardian's leave. The vet shifted his weight slowly, lowering himself further until his knees touched the ground. His palms stayed open, visible, resting quietly on the soil. He avoided her eyes, letting them pass instead over the broken light that filtered through the leaves, over the outline of her massive shoulders, over the still body that needed his touch. She gave a low rumble, soft but firm, her chest vibrating against the earth. It was not a threat, only a statement. She was still there. She still decided. Minutes stretched like hours. A cicada called from somewhere high above, its steady rhythm pressing against the silence. The younger gorilla barked once from the trees, then fell still, as if sensing the weight of the standoff. The guardian female's gaze flicked upward briefly at the sound, her nostrils flaring, her ears twitching toward her offspring. And then, slowly, the tension shifted. She leaned back slightly, rolling her weight off her arms. Her fingers loosened their grip on the soil. She did not yield entirely, but her body no longer braced for blockade. Elias murmured, steady and soft, "It's okay, girl." The words were carried on the air like breath, less command than reassurance. The vet remained motionless, letting her make the choice. It came in silence, without display. The gorilla pushed her weight onto her legs, rising with the slow gravity of stone. She stood a moment, her eyes sweeping the humans, then the young one above. At last, she stepped back, just a few paces. Not far, but enough. The clearing shifted instantly. The air that had been tight with waiting seemed to release. The vet moved forward, his gestures still small and precise. He reached the body and knelt, his ear bending close to listen. The faint rise and fall was erratic, the pulse of a life clinging by a thread. He placed his hand gently against her side, feeling the shallow movement beneath ribs that trembled with each effort. Her breath rattled, thin and unstable. She was in critical condition, the kind that could collapse at any moment without support. The team set to work quietly, laying out what tools could be used without alarm. Fluids prepared, airways checked, each step made in rhythm with the fragile tempo of her lungs. Around them, the forest watched. The guardian female lingered just beyond, her form dark against the green, her silence unbroken. She had given space, not surrender. The permission was conditional, bound by her watch. Every action carried risk. To touch was to help, but also to disturb. To administer was to offer strength, but also to invite resistance. The vet's hands moved with patience, his breath matching hers as if to lend her rhythm. The rise of her chest faltered, caught, then pulled again. He worked in silence, the team supporting without a word. And still she watched, the great female who had held them at bay. No anger, no violence, only the heavy, unblinking silence of the wild, granting passage but never relinquishing control. The rangers felt it in their bones. They had been allowed this closeness, nothing more. The true decision still belonged to the forest. The clearing held its breath as the vet began his work. The young female lay motionless, her chest rising with a rhythm so fragile it seemed each breath might be the last. Elias steadied the team with a look, urging silence and patience. Every sound carried weight here. The forest pressed in around them, green and listening. The tension balanced on what human hands could do without breaking the trust that had been granted. The vet reached into his kit, his motions slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial in their care. A line was prepared, fluids lifted, and the needle hidden until the last moment. He brushed the fur back gently, his touch testing for heat. The skin beneath was warm, too warm. Fever. Infection was possible, exhaustion certain. Without fluids, she would not last. Without intervention, her body would close in on itself, leaving nothing more than stillness. He found a vein at the edge of her arm, the pulse faint but present. His hands moved without haste, though he knew time was scarce. The needle slid in, a brief press, a connection made. A bag hung low, the fluid dripping slowly into her. It was not much, but enough to offer a chance. Her body gave the faintest flinch, a twitch of skin, then settled again into stillness. She did not fight and did not pull away. She was too weak for resistance. The lack of reaction was both relief and warning. Relief, because the process could continue. Warning, because such stillness showed how far she had fallen. The watching gorilla remained close, no longer a barrier, now a shadow just beyond the line of reach. Her eyes did not blink often, her chest rising in long, deliberate breaths. Each exhale was heavy, almost audible in the quiet. It was not agitation, it was presence. She watched each movement, every hand laid on the younger one, but gave no rumble, no sign of alarm. Instead, she breathed, deep, slow, steady, as if lending rhythm to the one who faltered. The juvenile had edged lower in the branches, his body restless, his hands twisting leaves into shreds. His eyes flicked between his mother and the figure on the ground, confusion and unease spilling from every small motion. At one point he gave a soft bark, quick and high, but the guardian's exhale answered it, grounding him into silence. He stayed, crouched low, his body coiled with the urge to move, yet held by the quiet authority below. The vet laid the back of his hand against her chest, counting the irregular beat of her heart, then checking again for fever. The warmth had not lessened, but the fluids gave a subtle change. Her breath came just slightly easier, the rise of her chest less staggered. It was fragile, a margin so slim it could vanish at any moment, but it was something. Elias noted it in silence, his jaw set, his eyes tracking both the body on the ground and the dark figure who watched them all. The bag dripped on. Each droplet was time borrowed, strength offered. Still, the danger remained stark. Fever could spread, and weakness could tip into collapse. The risk of loss lingered close, yet so did the quiet gift of the guardian's calm. The humans worked within that allowance, careful not to disturb what they had been permitted. Every move was measured. Every sound hushed. As the sun shifted, its light broke through the canopy, falling across both females. The downed gorilla's eyelids fluttered once, a faint reflex, then stilled. The watcher gave another long exhale, her chest pressing outward with a breath so steady it seemed to anchor the air around them. The team paused a moment, letting the silence hold. For all their skill, all their tools, it was the presence beside them that steadied the space. When the fluids ran low, the vet adjusted the line, checking the fragile pulse again. There was no fight, only stillness. The risk was not over, but the thread of life remained intact, stretched thin yet unbroken. And just beyond, the guardian stayed, silent, breathing, her presence not a disturbance, but calm. Her rhythm filled the clearing, a slow patient reminder that the wild itself had allowed this work to happen. Night fell slowly, the light draining from the canopy until the clearing was washed in shadow. The forest softened to a low hum, crickets taking the place of birdsong, distant rustles hinting at the movements of unseen creatures. Elias remained crouched at the edge, his body stiff with hours of stillness, but his eyes fixed on the two gorillas. The vet had done all that could be done for now. Fluids had been given, fever noted, and the fragile one left with the slimmest margin of hope. The rest of the night would depend on her strength and on whether she was left undisturbed. The guardian female did not leave her side. As the air cooled, her silhouette became a dark shape against the forest floor, her chest rising and falling with a slow, deliberate breath. She did not forage, though fruit hung above. She did not climb, though the safety of higher ground lay close. She simply stayed, grounded near the body that lay too still. Hours passed, and still she did not shift away. Elias noted her posture, the endurance it required. For a wild gorilla to deny food, to deny rest, was to place herself at risk. Energy lost in vigil was energy not gained for survival. Yet she remained, her body language calm, her presence heavy but not tense. She was not standing guard now in defiance. She was keeping company in silence. The young one's breaths were shallow and spaced far apart, but they continued. Each sound was a reminder that time still remained, though the danger of losing her lingered in every pause. Once, near midnight, the younger gorilla stirred faintly. Her chest heaved more sharply, her arm twitching in a weak attempt to shift. The guardian lowered her weight slightly, leaning closer. Then, with a slow movement, she extended her arm and laid her hand across the smaller one's shoulder. It was no restraint, no force, simply contact. A gesture of grounding, of presence. Her wide fingers splayed against the fur, and she stayed that way, chest still rising in deep rhythm as if lending her breath to the failing one. The forest quieted around them. Even the juvenile in the branches above had grown still, curled against himself, too uncertain to descend but unwilling to leave. Elias could see his eyes glint faintly in the half-light, watching the pair below with a nervous patience. The group was fractured by the weakness of one and yet held together by the endurance of another. Elias shifted his cramped legs, forcing himself back into stillness before the sound carried. His body ached from waiting, but he would not abandon the watch. He knew what was at stake. If the weak one's breath ceased, the troop could fracture, the young male be left vulnerable, and the bonds between them be strained beyond recovery. If the guardian female collapsed from her vigil, 2 lives would be at risk instead of 1. The balance of survival rested on the endurance of those long, silent hours. From time to time, the younger one's breath faltered, catching with long pauses that threatened final stillness. Each time, Elias found himself counting, measuring the seconds, until at last another shallow rise came, and each time the guardian shifted only slightly, her arm never leaving its place across the weak shoulder. Her body gave quiet reassurance in the absence of words, her deep exhalations filling the space with steadiness. Toward dawn, the air cooled further, carrying a faint mist through the undergrowth. Elias's eyes burnt with fatigue, but he kept them open. The weak one had survived the night so far, though her condition remained grave. The healthy female had not wavered once. She had not sought food, had not climbed, and had not closed her eyes. She stayed, anchored to the ground, her breathing the constant rhythm that carried both of them through the dark. The first light threaded through the leaves, catching on the fine mist that hung over the forest floor. The sick gorilla did not stir, her body slack, her breath still faint, but the one beside her remained upright, her arm still resting gently, her chest lifting in slow, patient rhythm. She had given the night entirely to the one who lay close. The forest shifted into morning, and Elias knew the hours ahead would decide whether survival could hold. But for now, the image remained fixed. Two bodies side by side, one barely alive and one who never left. The first light of dawn filtered through the canopy, threading pale gold across the clearing. Mist clung low to the ground, curling around roots and fallen leaves. Elias shifted where he crouched, his body stiff from the night's vigil, but his eyes did not leave the two gorillas. The weak female had survived the hours of darkness, her breath shallow but present. Every pause through the night had pressed them all closer to loss, but the thread had held. The guardian female had never left her post. She sat close still, her broad shoulders hunched, her gaze fixed on the younger one. She had not eaten, had not climbed, and had not closed her eyes. Her chest rose in a slow, deliberate rhythm, every exhale drawn deep into the clearing as though to steady the air itself. Even as the forest stirred awake around them, she remained unmoving. Then, as the light grew, a subtle shift broke the pattern. The younger one's head lifted, only slightly, a faint movement as if each muscle carried the weight of stone. Her chin barely cleared the earth, her eyes were half shut, and her neck was trembling under the effort. It was small, almost imperceptible, yet it was the first change since she had collapsed. For Elias, for the team, for the guardian female, it was a sign. The older gorilla gave a sound then, low, rough, caught in her chest. It was not the full rumble of warning nor the bark of alarm. It was softer, broken at the edges, a sound between grief and relief. Her breath shuddered through it, as though the strain of the night had cracked her silence. But she did not move closer. She stayed rooted where she was, watching, her hand still resting lightly on the soil. The weak female's head wavered, then dropped again, her body sinking back against the ground. The effort had cost her. The rise and fall of her chest quickened briefly, then slowed once more, uneven and fragile. The danger had not passed. To move had shown strength, but also how near she still lingered to collapse. Every shallow breath risked being the last. The guardian's body tensed as the younger one faltered, but she did not reach forward. She waited. Her stillness carried patience, but also restraint, as though her presence alone might be enough. Her nostrils flared, her deep exhale rolling through the quiet clearing again, grounding them both. Above, the juvenile shifted from his perch, edging lower, his hands gripping bark, his eyes wide. He gave a soft whimper, a sound of uncertainty that fluttered through the branches. The female glanced upward at him for a moment, then returned her gaze to the one who struggled to breathe. She answered him only with another long exhale, a rhythm that seemed to instruct him to hold still. Elias rubbed his eyes against fatigue, but his focus never left the sick gorilla's frame. He marked every twitch, every rise, every pause. The vet, seated low nearby, had his kit ready, though he too waited. Forcing another intervention now could undo the fragile stability she had gained. The risks were as sharp as they had been through the night. Move too soon, and she could falter. Wait too long, and she could slip away. The forest light grew stronger, spilling warmth into the mist. The weak female stirred once more, her hand twitching faintly as though searching for ground. She did not rise, but she shifted slightly onto her side, her breathing uneven yet still present. The guardian gave another low sound, softer this time, her chest pressing outward with a steadying breath. She leaned forward a fraction, then held herself back, her restraint as deliberate as her vigil had been. The moment balanced on silence. A life barely clinging, another life rooted in watch. The dawn had brought the first stir, fragile proof that the thread had not yet snapped. Around them the forest continued to wake, but within the clearing, everything remained bound to that slight lift of a head and the sound that answered it. The mist drifted with the new sun, and the clearing lay quiet again, waiting as the guardian female waited, steady and unyielding. The sun had climbed high by the time the first true change came. The forest was alive again with sound, birds weaving calls across the canopy, insects buzzing against the heat. The mist of morning had burnt away, leaving the clearing bare beneath the weight of daylight. The weak female lay still in the grass, her chest rising in a shallower but steadier rhythm than the night before. The fluids had done what they could, but the danger remained close. Hours of waiting pressed against the team's patience, every breath watched, every pause feared. Elias felt the strain in his body, but he did not shift his eyes from her. The vet remained low, ready but still, knowing that every choice carried risk. Intervention had been given. Now it was the gorilla's own body that had to decide. Survival in the wild never guaranteed mercy. The thin line between recovery and collapse could shift in an instant. Then, near midday, her body stirred with more than a twitch. She rolled her shoulders slightly, pressing her palm against the earth. It was an unsteady effort, her arm shaking beneath the weight of her frame. The attempt was halting, broken by long pauses, but it was a movement toward rising. The guardian female's head lifted at once. Her gaze sharpened, her chest swelling with a deeper breath. She made no sound, no approach, and only watched as the younger one strained to push herself higher. Her elbows locked briefly, trembling as she lifted her head, her chest, and her hips until at last she sat upright. The effort drained her, and she paused, sides heaving, nostrils flaring with shallow pulls of air. Her eyes half closed, her body swayed, but she did not fall back. For the first time since she had collapsed, she sat on her own. The clearing grew still. Even the juvenile above froze, watching with wide eyes. The guardian female shifted closer then, her massive body moving with slow gravity. She did not lunge, did not reach, but stopped just at her side. Her arm extended with deliberate care until her hand rested against the younger one's back. The touch was light, steady, anchoring. The weak female leaned slightly into it, her frame still shaking with fatigue. The contact gave her balance where her strength could not. Minutes passed in this way, the two bodies pressed close. One upright through will, the other through quiet support. The rangers said nothing. Elias swallowed hard, his throat dry, and murmured only a whisper. "You're almost there." The words did not carry far. They were not meant to. The gorillas had already written their own exchange in silence. At last, the younger one moved again. She planted her knuckles into the soil, testing her weight. With a labored groan of effort, she shifted forward, unsteady but determined. Her legs pushed against the ground, folding and unfolding until she rose onto her feet. She swayed hard, her body angled as though the earth might claim her again. But she did not fall. She stood, trembling, her breaths sharp and shallow. The guardian stepped close beside her, shoulder to shoulder. Her hand lingered at her back for a moment longer before sliding away. She gave one low grunt, not sharp, not commanding, a note of presence more than anything else. Then, without hurry, she turned her body toward the forest. The younger one hesitated, her steps faltering, her weight shifting unevenly, but she followed. The two of them moved together, the strong guiding the weak, each step slow but forward. The juvenile scrambled from the branches above, his voice catching in soft whines as he darted between trees to keep pace. The troop beyond called faintly, distant but waiting. The rangers remained where they were, unmoving. To follow now would mean to break the fragile rhythm unfolding in front of them. Some moments belonged only to the animals, beyond the reach of human hands. The younger one's gait was halting, each step uncertain, but the guardian did not rush her. She matched her pace, her frame broad and steady against the fragile body beside her. The forest swallowed them gradually, their dark shapes weaving into the undergrowth. Their breaths, once the focus of desperate silence, folded into the living pulse of the wild again. Elias let out the breath he had been holding. The vet closed his kit without a word. They would not follow. Survival had passed back fully into the forest's hands where it belonged. The canopy shifted with wind, the leaves trembling softly. A final glimpse of the pair lingered, one swaying on her feet, one pressing forward at her side. Then they were gone into the green, leaving the clearing empty once more. The forest exhaled in their place, the grasses bending, the sound of wings carrying high above. The day moved on in silence, and the image remained, two gorillas side by side, leaving without words,